I'm off mute, but I can't start my video. It says you cannot start your video because the host has stopped it. Okay, here we go.
Sorry, when you were on your break, we saw you looking at your phone, so I thought I'd give you your privacy.
Oh, I thought I'd hit the stop video. Oh well, learn it, live and learn. Okay, welcome back, everyone. Okay, so we are going to be moving on to our second presentation with ReCentre Consulting from Simon Fraser University. Again, they will have 20 minutes to present, and followed by questions from the judges, then questions from our two sponsors, Cathexis and Goss Gilroy. And if there's time, Christine Shepard will read a selection of audience questions that have been gathered through the chat box. Remember to send your questions directly to Christine Shepard in the option, the drop-down option. So without further ado, I'll hand the mic over to Simon, to ReCentre Consulting.
Is it possible to have my video? I'm unable to do it myself. It looks like it's controlled by the host. This is Stephanie speaking. Stephanie Liu.
No, thank you. I'm just trying to find you on the list, and I'll get that done right here.
Thank you so much.
Not a problem. You should have it now. Yep.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Great. So if we're all ready, let's get started then. So first of all, thank you so much to the BBBS, the Canadian Evaluation Society, as well as the judges for this opportunity. We're very excited to share our evaluation proposal for Big Brothers Big Sisters, Developmental Relationship Group, and Individual Mentoring. Before we get started, we would like to acknowledge that we are currently working on Coast Salish territory, the traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. As well, we are working on the traditional territories of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. Finally, we acknowledge that the work we propose today will be taking place on the traditional territories of 70 First Nations in Saskatchewan. We are ReCentre Consulting, a group of students with expertise in public health and political science who take an holistic and equity-focused approach to evaluation. Here's the outline for our presentation today. We're not going to go through it one by one, as we'll be covering all these things very soon. So to begin, numerous lines of evidence have shown that the social determinants of health, including socioeconomic status and employment status, play a major role in influencing development. And this is especially salient in Saskatchewan, where 25% of youth live in poverty, and suicide is the second leading cause of death among youth. Furthermore, research has shown that facing adversity and stress can negatively impact development of children and youth. However, there is a positive note. Positive interpersonal relationships, such as between youth and mentees, can help buffer against the adverse effects of stress and build resiliency. So, the 5 Saskatchewan BBBS agencies work to facilitate these interpersonal relationships by providing life-changing mentoring relationships to help ignite the power and potential of young people across the province. Each BBBS site has multiple programs. However, 3 major programs were identified as being shared across all of the sites. And the overall goal of the programs is that all young people can realize their full potential. So the programs are outlined here. Just briefly, in one-on-one mentoring, a youth and a mentor participate in community activities. In-school mentoring, it's the same scenario, except this takes place weekly at schools throughout the community. And finally, in the Shared Journey program, an Indigenous and a non-Indigenous youth and mentor learn from each other and mobilize pathways towards shared reconciliation. So just an example of the impact of BBBS. So in 2018 and to 2019, BBBS of Saskatoon served 607 children and youth, and there were over 36,000 hours spent with the mentors and mentees offering personal support. So this clear impact in fostering interpersonal relationships in the community is noted. And it was identified that these impacts should be shared with others in a collective story. Furthermore, Saskatchewan BBBS agencies' activities should demonstrate alignment with the national BBBS theory of change, as well as the goals of the Community Initiative Fund, which is the major funder of the initiative. So we propose using an equity-focused approach grounded in the 4R framework for working with Indigenous populations, because it was noted that over 50% of the youth involved in the BBBS programming are Indigenous. And just briefly, the 4R framework is an established framework for working with Indigenous populations. The 4R stand for respect, relevance, reciprocity, and responsibility. And this framework will guide the entirety of our evaluation to ensure that we're working with the community and empowering them and building capacity. As well, this will be used to evaluate the impact of the activities and share results with all relevant stakeholders.
This logic model shows our understanding of the Big Brothers Big Sisters program. The slide only looks complicated, but that's because we understand that this program encompasses many components that lead to the overall mission to ignite power and potential for young people. This logic model directly integrates the goals of the Community Initiative Fund, which funds the Big Brothers Big Sisters programming. Those are shown in blue. So to break down our logic model for you, I have here the inputs that go into the program. So we have 5 Big Brothers Big Sister agencies in Saskatchewan, the youth, the mentors that volunteer their time, schools and community spaces where these programs are run, and the funding sponsors for this program. Activities, as Natasha's already mentioned, I also added an additional programming box. We recognize that each of the agencies, Big Brothers Big Sisters programs, encompass different programming that are site specific. And we wanted to show that we acknowledge that those exist and also they also contribute to the program's overall goals. So as a Big Brother Big Sister run these activities, there are various outcomes. First, through mentorship programming, youth build a positive mentor relationship and gain increased access to resources and support networks. Through shared journey programming, youth gain knowledge and reconciliation and learn about First Nations, Métis, and settler culture and community. Through school mentorship programs, youth feel more connected and comfortable in a school setting, which leads to the desire to stay in school and continue learning. Through all this mentorship engagement in the community and school setting, youth also develop social, technical, emotional, language, and communication skills. These short-term skills allow youth to continue to grow and gain confidence in many ways, as demonstrated in the medium-term goals you see here. These lead to long-term impact, which directly reflect the Big Brothers Big Sisters national theory of change, which includes social and emotional competence, mental health and well-being, and education, engagement, and employment readiness, leading again to the overall mission to empower youth. So there are several factors to consider when looking at a program. Our assumption is that one of the key facets of this program, mentorship, which comes in many shapes and sizes throughout program activities, is a best practice to reach youth and encompasses all the values shown here, including expressing care, challenges, growth, providing support for youth, and share power and to expand possibilities for youth. 2 risks must be considered in this program that we've identified: the potential for participant fatigue from mentors who may not have time for mentee after a relationship has already been built, or vice versa with considering youth participation. Additionally, there is a risk that the program does not impact its intended audience, as many engaged youth are at risk and may be difficult to reach. Finally, external factors to consider include the changing support of families, schools, and communities, as well as the historical colonial context in which these programs are run.
We have identified numerous stakeholders listed here, from primary stakeholders, including the direct beneficiaries and participants in the program, to tertiary stakeholders, which encompasses the broader context of the program and includes the funders as well as the national BBBS agency. And finally, recognizes that the effects of the program ripple into communities across Saskatchewan. So to ensure that stakeholders are engaged throughout our evaluation, we proposed forming an evaluation advisory committee composed of current and former youth, mentors, representatives from BBBS, as well as potentially representatives from the Community Initiative Fund and BBBS Canada. And this evaluation advisory committee will have an integral role in ensuring that the tools that we use in the evaluation are useful and feasible. As well, it will ensure that key stakeholder perspectives and their priorities are integrated in the evaluation process from inception to completion. And finally, to continue to engage stakeholders, we will train community leaders to collect some of the data that we will be using in the evaluation, with the overall focus of empowering the community and building capacity for future evaluation.
So we wanted to acknowledge that this evaluation will be an impact evaluation, which is the most, is the best way in order to assess how collectively all these organizations are contributing to the BBBS mission. And additionally, we'll be taking both a participatory and equity-focused approach as well. And again, this is just acknowledging that these are our primary stakeholders are at-risk youth that also are representative across different backgrounds and nationalities. And it's really important that our work, it both actively reflects their voices and their experiences. So this overall is our main data collection methods. They were designed keeping in mind, again, that our primary stakeholders are mentees and youth, some in a school-based setting. And so we have our document review, our surveys, our community-based interviews, and also the use of Photovoice. I'd like to particularly highlight the use of surveys, which will help us gather that important quantitative data. Particularly, this will be implemented using an emoji survey when we're working directly with the youth, particularly in elementary school setting. And additionally, our community-based interviews will be looking at opportunities during those in-community interactions between mentors and mentees. And so we'll be, these will take place within the communities where it's most convenient for the youth, in opportunities where they're already interacting with their mentors and where they've already built rapport, to provide a safe and comfortable environment for these interviews. And to talk a bit more about Photovoice on the next slide, this is a really innovative arts-based qualitative data collection method. Youth are either offered a camera, or you can use their cell phones to take photos and videos that really capture their voice and their experiences in the community. And this is an innovative opportunity to allow youth to not only have more buy-in in this evaluation, but to also act as co-researchers in the project as well, which we think is really valuable. And we'd like to acknowledge that we'll be taking on a participatory data analysis process as well, which will involve our advisory committee. And here, pictured here, is the use of data placemats, which we intend to print out the main findings from our preliminary data analysis, and really just ask our youth, our community members, our advisory committee, kind of what they think. Do these findings reflect what they're hearing and what their experiences are in the community?
So before going through the evaluation matrix, it is important to consider how we define success. So ReCentre Consulting acknowledges that the definition of success must come from the stakeholders involved, from the funders of Big Brother, Big Sister to, most importantly, the program beneficiaries. Thus, during our initiation visit with the Evaluation Advisory Committee, we will discuss what success looks like for all stakeholders involved. We have 3 evaluation questions in our evaluation matrix. For the sake of time, I'll just go through one sub-question for each of them. So our first question is, did the Developmental Relationships Program produce intended results in the short, medium, and long term? And if so, to whom and to what extent? The first sub-question is, what were the results of the Developmental Relationships Program? This can be measured through various indicators, such as the number of skills developed, the stakeholders' perceptions of the benefits of the Developmental Relationships Program, and also note in the RFP, or as indicated in the RFP, we will take into account the differences between unique mentoring relationships, such as the duration of relationships and the frequency of match monitoring. This will be measured through data sources, as you can see here, such as mentees, mentors, etc., and through data collection methods that Stephanie has already described. Go to the next slide. Our second evaluation question is, how valuable were the results to clients, the community, and the 5 Big Brother Big Sister organizations? And so the first sub-question is, how relevant were those findings to stakeholders? And again, I just want to remind that something such as relevance is needs to be defined by the stakeholders and how they define relevance and that success. So the indicator we have here is the stakeholders' perceptions of the relevance of the developmental relationship program. And again, data sources and data collection methods are indicated. You can go to the next slide. And our final evaluation question is, to what extent can results be attributed to the developmental relationship program? And so we want to understand if the program activities led to the specific results that were observed. So an example sub-question is, to what extent did the program contribute to the social emotional competence of mentees? An example indicator is the change in social emotional competence from baseline intake assessments, because we wanted to try and, if possible, have some sort of comparison that was already collected through Big Brothers Big Sisters, as well as the stakeholders' perceptions of the effects of the program on the mentees' social and emotional competence.
So here we have our knowledge sharing plan to show the Big Brothers Big Sisters collective impact. The goal here is to share with all the stakeholders the impactful stories that we hear as an evaluation team through 3 different medias: a complete photo, voice album, and video, shared through a viewing event, which we'd like to hold in each region with Zoom connectivity, so all the 5 regions can share this together. Bi-monthly culturally responsive and accessible newsletter, which our final one developed by our advisory committee, and a report in various formats appropriate for different stakeholders, with the first page being devoted and developed by the youth in the program. Here we have some important activities and deliverables for our evaluation. Notably, we plan on forming our, oh, you go back, sorry. Thank you. Oh. Notably, we plan on forming our participant advisory board as soon as possible to ensure the evaluation proposal, as you've already seen it, is approved by the committee and appropriate. During the data collection phase, we want to ensure continued transparency through working closely with program staff and to make sure we develop a relationship with community engagement. Our team will ensure monthly updates to our key stakeholders during data collection and the key deliverables as mentioned previously.
As with any evaluation, there are a number of challenges that will need to be addressed in order to effectively evaluate the impact of the developmental relationships program. So for example, our team will be working with diverse populations, and we'll have to ensure findings represent accurate data and diversity of all sides. In order to mitigate this challenge, our team will be using a bottleneck analysis and do cultural sensitive training. And also we will use snowball sampling to recruit mentees from diverse backgrounds. Yeah. Next, thank you. To successfully carry out the evaluation, we implement 2 competencies. The first competency necessary for successful evaluation of the BBB developmental relationship program is CE Competency 4.6, communicates project progress to all concerned. For example, our knowledge plan, sharing plan and the schedule keeps stakeholders informed about the process of evaluation. The second important CE Competency 5.5 builds partnerships within the evaluation context. For example, we will create a youth-friendly environment and encourage youth to participate in data collection and analysis. We would like to thank all the individuals on this slide, and we really appreciate the opportunity to present here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you to everybody.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much, ReCentre Consulting. We'll now hand it over to the judges, Frederick, Emily, and Natalie, to ask you some questions.
Great. I think we're going to go in the same order as last time, just so you know, Catherine. So thank you so much for your presentation. It was really interesting, and it's always interesting for me as a consultant to get to hear other people's takes on the same kinds of RFPs that we see all the time. So something that jumped out at me that I'd like to ask you about in your proposal is the involvement of youth. So you've highlighted in a few different places, different points in time and different ways in which youth will be engaged in the evaluation work as you're proposing to undertake it, as well as how creating a youth-friendly environment will demonstrate some of the capabilities and will help to address some challenges that you've identified. So it'd be great if you could spend a few minutes expanding on how you propose to create this youth-friendly environment, how you might go about recruiting youth to participate in your evaluation, continue to foster their engagement throughout the evaluation, and then finally, how you would ensure that the engagement of youth in the evaluation is meaningful for the evaluation itself and for the youth that are participating.
I can start and then let the team kind of take it from there. So first off, our team has previous experience working with youth in community settings. So we are prepared with experience to kind of enter in that way and bring our previous experience of like activities that we've used in the past, or different just like games that youth enjoyed that we have experience with, and kind of bring that to break the ice and make a comfortable environment for the youth. As well, ensuring that the youth in our advisory committee are engaged and able to help spread the word about our kind of like snowball recruitment of our daily evaluation and kind of work that way.
And I'll just
oh, sorry, Steph, do you want to go ahead?
And I'll let you elaborate, Natasha. We were really discussing just leveraging the opportunities that already exist within the BBS programs, just in order that we don't really exhaust the attention of our participants, but really leveraging those opportunities that already exist. So in those one-on-one community opportunities and any kind of mentorship opportunity to really engage those youth that are already engaged. And again, as Cassandra said, hopefully in these school settings, being able to kind of snowball and incorporate more youth as well.
One final thing I'd like to add, in addition to what Cassandra and Stephanie has said, is that we took a vested approach in ensuring that our data collection methods would be not just feasible for youth, but something that they would actually like to participate in. So for instance, instead of just a survey that's like a Likert type, like what do you agree, do you disagree, the integration of visual emojis will ensure that the youth are engaged and the survey is accessible and useful to them. As well, the use of Photovoice is an example of the way that youth can use a tool that they probably already are familiar with, depending on age and accessibility of technology, but something as simple as taking a photo is actually a really important way for youth to make their voices heard. And of course, with the appropriate mentorship from our team, as well as the other stakeholders in the evaluation, the youth will be able to harness this skill that, again, they probably already have experience with, and use that to share their own voice in our evaluation.
I'd also, if I can add something, with respect to the data analysis kind of plan or the party that we spoke to, I know, for example, Cassandra had experience with something similar when she was a youth, where all the organizations met and made a really fun, engaging event that had a really lasting impact on Cassandra, and she was, and that was to evaluate the program there. So we try and ensure that all the activities that are involved, including this analysis plan, are as fun as possible and kind of are able to bring and connect the various organizations while also trying to respect the budget and using something like Zoom as well, instead of having to travel necessarily to one common location.
Yeah, and actually, our team we're discussing that we will use some comics and to put in a video, so to make everything easy and make all the youth informed, and also because we are also experienced organizing some icebreaker events, so it will make those teenagers feel included.
Thanks. Fred, do you want to ask your questions?
Yes, thank you. You might hear my dog. Sorry about that. Okay. Thanks you for your nice and really well done presentation. I actually have a question around the time frame of what you're proposing in terms of activities and verbals. You have a slide at 24 depicting the overall schedule and steps toward for the evaluation projects. But I would like to hear you more around details on how the methods, the four main methods, surveys, interviews, document review, and Photovoice, will be implemented along the way, and how you manage to make sure that you can keep the projects within 20 to 30 consulting days in terms of overall level of effort, and avoiding scope creep in implementing these methods. So I guess my question is, I have two parts. So maybe providing more insight on how the methods will be in fact implemented over the time frame, and how you manage scope creep to make sure that you deliver and what you suggest, but also you get in order to get the data you need to answer the evaluation questions. And I'll open a bracket to my question around the methods. I looked at your evaluation matrix, very well done, and that most of the time all the methods will be used to answer each of the, let's say, sub questions and indicators, and sometimes the Photovoice is not included. For me, I would like to hear you a bit more on the add value of Photovoice compared to the three other methods. So I guess I have two questions. Thank you.
I can speak to Photovoice to start off. So Photovoice is important for us because it brings the story aspect to our evaluation. So really getting life experiences from our participants, we think is very important, and we value that. That Photovoice, our understanding of it, it's not incredibly complicated to set up. So we would set it up at the beginning, ensuring to ask very specific questions to the youth who are taking the cameras to go take pictures, and ensuring that the questions that we ask them will provide answers that we're looking for and responses that we are hoping to get back according to our evaluation matrix. And then once that's done, once the youth are set up with their cameras, that's not a project we have to worry about again for a couple of weeks, maybe a couple of touch bases here and there with the youth. And then at the end of the maybe month or two, we can then get their feedback and their photos. Time frame wise, we were looking, I think, about 4 months for this project, with the LOE around 20 days, 20 to 30.
Yeah, and to expand on the question on the time frame, I agree. I think once we've had the first initiation meeting, we'll be able to try and roll out the survey, the instructions for the Photovoice, like quite quickly to get those going. And I think the biggest time consumer of the data collection methods will be the interviews. And so for those, we have limited them primarily to the like mentor-mentee, mentors and mentees, and that's why we wanted to try and book those with pre-planned visits, so we could coordinate with the staff to try and do those or lump them together on days to try and save time, and then I think by doing that, that will allow us to try to ensure that the evaluation is done within the proposed time frame.
Thank you. Natalie, you want to ask your questions?
Thank you. Thank you to this consulting team. This was a really interesting and professionally done presentation. I really found it very well done, and you've answered questions very well. My colleagues have allowed you to elaborate on some of the very important strengths of your approach. I have one question that's actually based on something that I see as a real strength in what you've proposed. In your logic model, you do recognize that there are going to be some activities that don't necessarily fall within these three sort of major programs, and they're quite community specific. So you're recognizing that there's this diversity here. And so my question kind of builds on that. Given that there's 5 communities involved, which are really very different. Lloydminster is a very different place, different environment from Saskatoon or Regina. And they may have very different experiences with these programs. At the same time, you're wanting to talk about a collective result, a collective impact. How are you going to balance and be able to tell the stories within the specific communities so that the stakeholders there understand that they can recognize themselves in your findings?
I mean, I'm happy to jump in on that. I don't know exactly what slide it is. I think it's an evaluation matrix. So under the first evaluation question, sub-question C, we specifically designed to try and account for the unique experiences of each of the 5 organizations, as well as for the different youth that are represented by Big Brothers Big Sisters. So, for example, we highlighted youth such as Indigenous youth, racialized youth, LGBTQ+ youth, as well as youth in both remote and more urban centers. And so the plan is to both look at the results like as an aggregate, but then break them down based on those kind of categories that I alluded to ensure that there's representation and that the results can be interpreted among those groups so that that's not lost. And so we want to present the results in both ways so that we can see maybe if there's equitable improvements across the groups that I listed.
I can also contribute that the participatory analysis that we're hoping to do with youth in the program will allow them to kind of give their perspectives on what we've pulled out. And we're hoping to do that across the 5 different sites so that we can see what the differences or similarities may be for the youth with the data, and just to see like what they respond to and what they don't, so that we can try to disaggregate the data based on each of the communities as well.
And I'll just quickly add, by using Photovoice as a tool, and in the end when we're forming that photo book and that video, I think one method that really helps kind of bring personality in each of the 5 regions is having just those faces in that in the Photovoice that each of these regions will be able to recognize those members, and it really kind of personalizes the experiences. And so this could come through in like individual videos for each region, and they can come together and kind of bring that collective voice. And one of the strengths in Photovoice is being able to analyze those major themes that are come across, but then also in the individual regions as well.
Okay, did the judges have any more questions? No?
Nope.
I'd like to invite two of our sponsors, Rochelle Zorzi from Cathexis and then Karen Cotto from Goss Gilroy. I'd like to invite you to ask questions.
Thank you. Thanks very much for your presentation. It was an excellent presentation. I guess my question comes from something that you had introduced kind of early on in the planning phase of the evaluation. You had mentioned how important it was for stakeholders to be involved in kind of defining what success looks like, what relevance means. And you had quite a large group of stakeholders that you identified as being important in planning this evaluation. How are you imagining that will play out? How will it actually occur to get their feedback about what success looks like?
That's a great question. Thank you. I think that having the evaluation advisory committee, which we're envisioning as a representative amalgamation of various stakeholders in our evaluation, having them engage from the very beginning will ensure that they have a hand in looking at these evaluation questions and putting their own thoughts and insights into them. So expanding on the definition and agreeing on a shared collective definition before moving forward. Furthermore, so that's kind of at the beginning of the evaluation, and then later in the evaluation, when we are having the sharing circles and the kind of data party to take a look at initial data, we're going to be really taking a defined look at how the participants in the evaluation respond to the data. So hearing about their definitions of, like you said, what success is, what relevance is, and making sure that what they see reflected in the data reflects their own definitions of those terms.
Thank you.
Okay, there I am. Okay, thank you, Rochelle, for your question. And now, Karen, do you have a question? Karen from Goss Gilroy?
Yes, I do. Thanks very much. And thanks for the great presentation. Very interesting approach. Job well done. My question is around consent and confidentiality in working with a vulnerable population such as youth. You did actually touch on it a little bit near the end when you talked about risks. I'm just wondering if you can elaborate a little bit on, how you're going to approach duty of care and ethical use of data when you do have some collective methods that you're implementing. So the community interviews where you could have a number of different youth participating at the same time, or even your data party, and how are you going to ensure that the youth's information is used in an appropriate way?
I can start us off if you'd like. Thank you for your question. This is actually something we discussed quite in depth about during our proposal. We are all in research, and so when conducting research, we have to be very mindful of youth participants, vulnerable populations. So we have some background in how to handle data and such in that capacity. Additionally, I think one of our main things would be to ask questions that were going to be helpful for the evaluation without without like prying or trying to like address topics that may be sensitive for youth. If they would like to come forward and share their stories, like we are going to try to create a safe space for them to do so. However, making sure that we're being very mindful of the questions that we're asking and the approach we're taking to ask them. I'll start with that if anyone else would like to follow up.
And I think just to also add, it would be really important just to consider or consent as an ongoing consent. And so continuously checking in on our youth to see if they're comfortable with the interactions that are happening. And I guess another method to make this perhaps a lower barrier is that there's no criteria in terms of the length or duration of their participation. And so there's no requirement that you must be participating through the entire 4 month of the evaluation. If for some instance where just the interactions are tiring, or even just like schoolwork gets a bit too much for our youth, then they have full right to like withdraw their consent at that time. So really being mindful that this population and the youth do have a lot of things going on in their life as well.
And just finally, I would also like to add that our entire evaluation is grounded in the 4 R's framework for working with Indigenous populations. And a key, actually, one of the 4 R's in that framework, the last one, is responsibility. And that means that the community has access to appropriate data in order to ensure that it can be meaningfully implemented. But as mentioned, due to our experience in research as well as in best practices in evaluation, we know that data is confidential and we'll take the steps to anonymize it when appropriate. And then moving forward for its implementation, we want to be sure that the results from the evaluation are relevant and appropriate to communities, because that's where that's of particular importance to us as we're grounded in the 4R framework.
Okay, thank you very much, Karen from Goss Gilroy, for your question. I'd like to now open it up to the audience questions that were gathered through the chat box. Christine?
Yeah, we have a couple of great questions from the audience. The first set of questions that came from the audience focus on engagement of Indigenous communities in your evaluation, and to what extent you feel that engagement with Indigenous people will be important for your evaluation and how you plan to do that, particularly how you plan to capture an Indigenous voice throughout the entire step of the evaluation, not just at a particular data collection or data analysis part, but throughout the entire process.
Sure, that's an excellent question, and it's definitely a priority for us as we think about potentially conducting this evaluation. So I think the first thing is the formation of the Evaluation Advisory Committee. We want to ensure that that is representative of our diverse population of stakeholders, including Indigenous individuals from different nations, whether that be which will encompass both youth trainees and potentially other stakeholders. As well, because we're working with the Evaluation Advisory Committee from the beginning, they are setting the stage in terms of defining different ways of knowing and defining values and defining what's important to them. And this voice and their voice will be carried out throughout the entire evaluation to ensure that Indigenous ways of knowing and learning and being are respected and have a major role in our evaluation.
Just something small add on is I think it's important to, and this in part relates to the question from Rochelle earlier, is that when defining success and when involving these different stakeholders at all levels of the evaluation, it's important to acknowledge power imbalances, for example, from the funders to the mentees, and so on across the various groups. So I think it's important, whether it's like these meetings are held over Zoom or in person, that that there's breakouts where people are not all discussing everything together, so that we can ensure that there's and there's 5 of us that can go into and kind of facilitate these breakouts to try and ensure that various voices are heard, and that that we center Indigenous ways of knowing.
The second set of questions that we had from the audience were around positivity bias in your findings that you might learn in your focus groups by focusing on some of the successful aspects of the program. People want to know how you plan to collect data from people who perhaps had a non-successful mentee-mentor pairing, or for youth or children or mentors that have had a negative experience in the program.
I think it'll be really important to, thank you for the question, to get from the Big Brothers Big Sisters community, like different names and just ways to connect. Perhaps they didn't have a positive experience in the program, but they were still open to like newsletters or being connected to the program in some capacity. So trying to advertise the evaluation perhaps through like the Big Brothers Big Sisters newsletter, in ways of like, do you have, like, asking if people have anything that they would like to say or comment on from the program as well, trying to reach out that way.
I think as well, just being sure that everyone involved in the evaluation understands that it's an impartial evaluation and we're seeking all feedback, not just positive feedback, but potentially negative feedback as well, with the goal of overall assessing the impact and the value of this program. And just kind of expanding on that, I think that the use of Photovoice as a technique will help with that, because it really gives the participant, like Stephanie was saying earlier, they are a researcher and they're telling their own story. So regardless of what the content is, they have that firsthand power and that agency to share it. If it's negative, okay. If it's positive, okay as well.
Yeah, I definitely think it's, as Natasha said, it's important how it's framed and how the language we use, that the findings and that the information that people share can be negative, positive, or anywhere in between. And also, if possible, I think, I know that Big Brothers Big Sisters collects regular feedback and would likely have some information on pairings that ended prematurely. And so if possible, we'd be able to make sure that we collect information from and feedback from those pairings that didn't that ended prematurely, and also even have the opportunity to do a few interviews to learn more and expand, so that we are able to have a more holistic and representative evaluation.
Okay, thank you very, very much, ReCentre Consulting. I'd like to take this time to thank both teams for their presentations. I think the judges certainly have a tough job ahead of them. The judges will now be moving to another room to deliberate. Each team will also have 15 minutes with the judges to get feedback on their presentation. I would like to invite you all to come back at 7 p.m. to this very same link, so you can either leave or just put yourself on mute and close your camera, and come back and join us at 7 p.m. Ontario time for the announcement of the winning team. Thank you very much, everyone, and we will see you in an hour and a half or so. Take care.